If people want to get warmed up in the chat, I'm Paul. I'm going to be working with Claire today. I'd love to know where people are from. Don't worry, I won't read it out, but it's lovely to just get some location. I'm from Canada originally, so please let me know if you can't understand me because I've lived in North London for over 25 years, but my vocabulary is very odd and my accent can become even odder. But I'd love to know where people are from if you want to just put it into chat or where they're calling in from today. So I'm in North London, but from Vancouver, Canada. I am a +1 as well. So that's where I'm from. But if people want to put some South London, Claire, whereabouts in South London are
you? Calling from the other side of the river. I'm down in Streatham Hill.
St. Retham, we used to call it when I lived in.
Exactly.
Yes, I used to live in St. Ockwell, as it were. Oh, Huddersfield. I love Huddersfield, but from Scotland, lovely. When you do put stuff into chat, we won't say your name, just, to respect your privacy or privacy, as I should be saying.
But we can all understand.
But again, do feel free to ask some questions. I'm happy to get started because I think we actually had quite a lot of people register, but I do appreciate that many people might watch the recording.
So we're gonna, absolutely. We'll kick off today. Welcome to the session. Just to make sure you're in the right session. This is about finding support for yourself when you're caring for someone with cancer. This session, for the most part, we'll be talking about that in the context of being a +1. So +1s in SHINE means friends, family, siblings, anyone who cares about a young adult with cancer. But actually the content is pretty applicable to anyone who's just wanting to kind of find new ways of asking for help or support or reflecting on how they do that. I've already told you and let you know that this session is being recorded. But yeah, there will be chance at the end for Q&A and questions, and we'd love to see you in the chat if you have anything to say as we go along. One last technical point. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you can change the view so that you can see us in gallery or speaker view. So if you put it on speaker view, you'll just see the person talking and the slide, and that might just be a bit easier to see. But yeah, getting on with the session. This session was actually inspired by a post in our +1s Facebook group. It was someone who'd been part of our online program, which for +1s, which we will talk a bit about later. And she shared some slides she'd created to talk about the kind of reality of responding to offers of help that she got. And she said, well, she described it as a burden, kind of the extra burden of having to think about what you need, having to respond to offers of help, and how it can be actually more difficult than you'd anticipate. We will share those slides with you at the end, but we sort of thought it was worth acknowledging that whether you feel like a carer or not, your life as a +1 will have changed a lot because of the diagnosis of your loved one. And asking for and receiving help isn't as straightforward as we might have thought. So today we're gonna hear from Paul a bit later. I'll let him introduce himself properly afterwards. But first of all, I'm gonna introduce you to Antonia, who and her experiences of being a +1. Antonia actually was going to be in the session and talk to us, but she can't join us today, which demonstrates really clearly part of the experience of being a +1, the unpredictability of it, not being able to quite know where you're going to have to be at what time. However, I did manage to catch up with her in the week. And so through the wonders of technology, we can still bring you that chat, and we can hear a little bit about how she's navigated that tricky path of asking for help as a +1. Thanks, Paul.
I'm going to play the video. Please do let us know if you can't hear the video at all. So please enjoy.
So we're going to now talk to Antonia, who's come along to talk to us about her experiences of being a +1. Hi, Antonia. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, Claire.
So do you fancy just introducing yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your background and what your situation is.
Yeah, so I'm Antonia, I'm 32 and my husband Reece is 30. He had a rare type of brain cancer called medulloblastoma in 2017, and after 6 months of intensive chemotherapy and radiotherapy, he went into remission until May of this year. So May 2022, we found out that it's back and in the same places, so in his brain and his spine. And yeah, we're just kind of trying to negotiate the journey. now. We have been told that due to his previous kind of intense therapy, that now it will be incurable. There won't be a cure for it. It will simply be just trying to keep it at bay. Professionally, I'm a paramedic, although I'm not working frontline at the moment, just because Reece is very immune suppressed. It's not safe. I am still working within the NHS and still work as a paramedic, just not frontline.
Thank you. Gosh, it's a lot you're going through, and it brings us on to what we're talking about today, really, that how in that role as someone who's caring about someone with cancer, going through cancer, how you yourself access support and how easy or difficult that might be. So I just want to check in with you, like how have you found you've been supported through this experience?
I think it's been very mixed. I think we've had some really good support. My parents particularly have really kind of nestled us and kind of supported us in whatever we need, and are very approachable. I find it very easy to kind of ask them for support. There has been some surprises along the way. So some friends and family that I think on paper I thought would be supportive, that maybe are struggling a little bit more to give us the support that we've been asking for or that we expect. In terms of my job role, actually quite surprisingly, it's been quite difficult. I think that it's maybe difficult for workplaces to understand when it's not the kind of individual with cancer, it's their plus one or their relative. I think it's slightly more complicated for them to understand the importance of maybe alternative duties or sick pay, negotiating things like appointments is quite difficult. There is no rhyme and reason sometimes to cancer, and you have to kind of roll with the waves, and it's difficult to get an employer to sometimes understand that life is quite vicarious, and you might have to suddenly change plans, or there might be a day that you aren't able to work. So I had to kind of negotiate that quite early on, just because it was so unsafe for me to be at work in a clinical setting, that initially I had no choice but to go sick, which was frustrating because I wasn't sick, although I needed a couple of weeks to comprehend what was going on with us. I also understood the importance for me to still be working, and my own mental health, and also financially as well. There's a burden that comes with a cancer diagnosis in terms of getting to appointments and things like that. So that brought a lot of additional stress around, am I going to use up all my sick pay and have to go to half pay and things like that. And eventually if I'm honest with you, it came from a kind of brave place. I was able to speak up and say, look, this isn't working for me. I'm very capable of working, and it's not about my capability. It's purely that Reece is very vulnerable, and can you try and find a different area of the business for me to work in? And they did. And subsequently, actually, I found a team that's very supportive and very understanding of the need to sometimes just leave in the middle of the day to go to a blood test, or because Reece is unwell. And so that's been really good.
Yeah, it's really interesting you saying that it kind of, you needed to feel brave to kind of say what you needed. And I think that's something that we've talked about a lot in our Plus Ones program, about how difficult it is to kind of ask for the help and the support that you need in the way that you want it, and the way that works for you. So generally, how have you found that process? Like actually having to say to people, can you help me out here? Does that come naturally to you?
I think no, definitely not. I think part of that is as a professional myself, actually I did a job where it was my role to care about other people that I'm not related to and I have no kind of emotional attachment to. So I struggled in the beginning with kind of thoughts around failure. So if I'm asking for help, does it mean that I'm failing as a wife, as as a daughter, I suppose, going back to my parents at 32 and kind of saying, actually, I need you to do my washing, for example. I haven't been reliant in that way for some time. And it felt like I was kind of, I was failing as a wife, but also kind of failing as an adult as well. You should be able to look after those simple things. And I think, when stuff big events come through, it's always those little things that kind of take a back seat. So things like washing and cooking, bits like that, they just feel really hard to organize, but equally that actually you do need to have like fresh washing. you need fresh pants in the morning, and we got to a stage where we literally didn't, like we just were like scraping around for clothes, and luckily my mum came to our flat and took one look at the washing pile and essentially gave me no choice but to say, look, I'm taking it, you don't have a choice, I'm going to bring it back in a few days time. And I will never forget that, and actually was really thankful for it, because it was a real physical help. A lot of people will approach me and say, I'm here, I'm here, and if you need anything. And I actually find that the hardest, because I don't know from day to day sometimes what I need. And also it's, you've got so much other stuff on your mind to try and come up or conjure up an idea that, somebody can do where you don't feel like, a burden. I think sometimes there's that as well. Other people have got busy lives, and you kind of think like, can I really ring them up and ask them, for this really simple thing that I should be able to do? So yeah, I think I'm getting better at it. I don't think I'm perfect at asking for help, and there's definitely times where I kind of recognise that I could do a little bit with a bit of a hand, but I try and carry on until I get to a point where I think look around and I think actually I do need just a hand with this. So yeah, I think it's been tricky. I definitely think now we're a bit further along the line. I find that now I've identified what it is that I need help with, it's a lot easier. I think that was a big kind of stumbling block, was okay, like what do you actually need, what do I need my help, what do I need help with, what do I need support with? And now that I know that, and I know the things that are helpful, I find it much easier to kind of delegate that out to these people that want to be helpful. They generally do.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because we were talking about sort of some slides that were developed by one of our members from Plus One Circle, so I think and it's exactly that message, isn't it? It's a really lovely thing to say, give me a shout at any time, let me know if there's anything, but exactly as you say, the burden is then on you to do all the thinking and the action. You've got to work out what it is and make the call and do all that worrying about, is it okay to ask someone to come and do my washing for me, which isn't something that we naturally do, as like exactly as you say, it's hard. So just to kind of, we've obviously got people on the call who are going to be in the same situation, and I wonder if you've got any kind of advice that you've gleaned from your experience that you'd share with them.
So I definitely think the first piece of advice is kind of identify who it is that you can rely on, and I think that it is a difficult process. I certainly kind of mourned, if I'm honest, for those friendships that I just thought that we would be friends forever. And I think nobody envisages bad things happening, do they? But you watch in the movies and something bad happens and there's 20 lasagnas on the front door, and and everybody's running around you. And I think it's a tough pill to swallow, but that's generally not true. I don't think that really happens. I think that comes from you being able to say, this is what I need. There obviously are really lovely people out there, and I've got really kind and caring friends that have done big gestures like that, but it doesn't carry on. And I definitely think that's a big thing. There are some people who will be able to naturally support you, and sometimes the people that surprise you, that on paper you wouldn't think would be the people, and others that you think, oh yeah, I thought they'd be there for me, and they're not. And it's tough. I think it's sometimes a bit emotional, but you kind of have to move on from it, because you have to be able to know who it is that you can call upon. I completed my Plus One circles group just at the end of August, and certainly there are a group of people that I do rely on, although we all live over the country and they're not going to be able to kind of turn up at the door, in terms of advice, and also just offloading as well, just a space where I can kind of say, look, this is what's happening and it's really frustrating, without kind of judgment, but also without having to really explain, has been really good. And we're all there for each other, you know, we keep in regular contact, and it's also just really refreshing to know that sounding board's there if I were to need it. And then, you know, I think for us as a couple, we chose quite early on about kind of communication. So how do you communicate to people? You know, do you want to have a kind of a very public setting for that? I mean, I'm not a big user of kind of social media, but after a couple of weeks, we were finding it really draining to tell people kind of over and over again the same piece of advice, you know, advice. I don't mean that, I mean pieces of information, you know, about Reece, about what was happening. And I think originally it was really important that came from a personal place. You know, we weren't just putting it all over social media that Reece's cancer was bad. But beyond that, we have recognised that actually that's been really helpful to just have one place where we can update it, and you know, all our friends or the people that, you know, are trying to support us can be aware of what's going on. That said, we have had to be kind of careful that it doesn't seem like we're just putting a positive spin on it all the time. So we try and be as open as we can on it, but I certainly have found that really helpful to just have that place where we can, you know, pop an update and people are aware of what's going on. Because that's the other thing as well, you know, life is busy and you get people messaging you with, you know, well wishes and things, and sometimes you can't catch up with them. And I find myself thinking, if I don't reply to you, will you just kind of forget? I've forgotten, you've forgotten, you know, will I hear from you again? And I definitely think it's just about, you know, recognizing what you need, definitely, you know, and sometimes maybe relying on the same person for the same thing is quite good. You know, my mum is now our washer lady, and she knows that if I ring her up and say, please can you just do a couple of loads of washing, she'll do it, and that's really lovely, and actually something that I know if I need it I can have it, you know. But equally I've got control of that. She doesn't just walk in anymore and do it for me. And also the people, you know, who is it that you can rely on, who is it that's going to be supportive of you, you know. And sometimes that might be different for different people as well. You know, I am really fully aware that there's no kind of manual as to how to deal with the fact that, you know, your loved one's got cancer, and everybody's journey is different in it, and how they approach it is different. But certainly for us, yeah, that's been really helpful to kind of just, you know, utilize those things, recognizing who it is, what it is, and also how you want to kind of communicate, I suppose, news, but also how you want to communicate, how you're going to get that support as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's brilliant, like you say, like everyone will have their own way of processing it. It has to be done personally. But those things, those points about identifying who it is, like how you're going to communicate, and working out what it is you need, like those can all be personalized. So that's kind of perfect advice, really, and a really good thing to hand on. And I think you're right. It's a lot of it is about taking a space to process what's going on behind that stuff. So like you mentioned, the grief, when you realize people maybe aren't going to be the person that you hope they might be, or be the role that you thought they could be in your life. And I'm so pleased that you get that support from the +1 circle. Just to say to everyone else, the +1 circle is a program that Shine runs over 6 weeks, and we will be sharing details of that later, that you're very welcome to apply for. But it's been so lovely. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience. Sorry you can't be there on the day. I know this is on the day, so this is going to be a bit of a strange, but thank you so much for coming along now and sharing a bit of your story with us. I'm sure everyone is very grateful too. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Right. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always awful watching yourself on video, isn't it? But I'm really glad we were able to get that, so Antonia could be here in person, as it were. So listening to that, it's really clear that it's not a straightforward thing, working out what you need and how to communicate it. So I'm really happy to hand over to Paul, who I will let introduce himself, but just to say, Paul comes today with 2 hats. He is a +1 himself, but also works in corporate training and coaching, and he's going to talk to us a bit about how to find a way to communicate what you need. So I'm going to pass over to you, Paul.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And yeah, just as Claire's saying, I am a +1. I do realize that my picture is frozen in the PowerPoint. And also, I just want to say before we get started, apologies for the issue with the video. That was me actually trying to put something into chat. So when it jammed, that was my fault. So apologies. But I am going to share my slides in a moment. But I want to just start to encourage people to think about your needs. I'm not sure where you are as a +1, and I hate to use this term, but I think it's relevant, having been a +1 myself for, gosh, I'm going to get in trouble in a moment, 14 or so years. Like, where are you in your journey? Because some of you may be really, like, for example, I used to work as a carer in Canada and when I first moved to Britain. So I worked a lot with people with physical challenges. My mother worked in ICU and CCU, and I was really familiar with hospitals. Like, I was really familiar with hospitals. And my mom put me and my family on a cholesterol trial because my adopted sister had severely high cholesterol. And so we were part of the test cases. So I'm used to going to hospitals and demanding to see my mother. And hospitals to me were a place of fun, bizarrely, where I know for a lot of people, it's a place of trauma. And so when my partner was going through his diagnosis, it was and is, and do not get me wrong, I can be very flippant with my approach sometimes, but it was scary for us, like absolutely scary, and still can be. And now 14 years on, things are changing for my partner, and that's scary. But I just want to frame it to start. I don't really want to tell you all about my background, history, and experiences, but I am a +1, and my partner is living with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And so what I want to think about is, first of all, like your needs. And as Antonia was talking there, that your needs will change. She was sort of saying how she didn't even know what her needs were. And many of you may have seen this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. She's a lot in psychological principles, but it's also about how our needs change throughout our lives, but particularly when we're going through diagnosis or supporting someone through that diagnosis. Things will go up and down. So I'm just going to draw here on the slides because I think it's quite useful just to recognize, we all need the basic water, sleep, clothing, all that kind of stuff. But then as we, get older, we and develop more, and you can think about this even as a phasal development, as we leave our homes and go to college or university or move out and get our first jobs, we want to get a house or some place to live, a rental or whatever it may be. And we want some structure to our lives, and they just want to feel safe as well. And then, it's our social needs: giving, receiving kindness, friendship, love, belonging, all this stuff. And I just want us to start to think a little bit. Many of us want to feel independent. We want to feel that we have some dignity as we are maybe becoming vulnerable or supporting someone who is being thrown to the care of strangers. And that overall, a lot of the times, really what you normally find is when you get to the top of this chart or this pyramid, it's very easy for you to then give back and help support other people, whether it's with their physiological needs, their safety needs, so on and so forth. But I know for a lot of us, people around us may not necessarily either be that up the pyramid, as it were. Like, they may not feel great. They themselves may be panicking because their life has gone into turmoil because your husband or partner or their sibling or their child, even though that child may be an adult, is actually going through a diagnosis. They themselves might start to demand certain needs that I don't know how everyone here felt, but it was interesting. My partner's family are all fairly local to where we live, and they were interested, I would say, maybe for the first 6 months. One of them went to one appointment and made the needs all about themselves. I've been to a few appointments with my partner, and he now tells me he doesn't want me to come because he's so independent. Hasn't updated the family at all. My mother is more interested in my partner's diagnosis than my partner's parents. And that's tough for my partner. So I'm interested if people wouldn't mind. And again, I might read them up, but I won't read out who put the contributions. But in chat, like right now, what do you need in terms of needs? And what does the person you're supporting need? Because I know in +1s, it can also be parents. We've had parents who've been +1s as well as others, but I'd love people to put into chat, like right now, currently, what do you need? Like, I always just need a check-in with friends. Very few of my friends now, some do, they will ask about my partner's health, but I just like when people check in and go, okay, where is your partner in the diagnosis, how things, treatments, but I'd just be curious to ask people. I don't want to go around and pick on people, but if you wouldn't mind putting into chat any kind of needs that you can see from this. Anyone? Claire, do you have any needs? I mean, I know you are someone who is lived through a cancer diagnosis. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting how I think when you're going through it really depends. Obviously, when you're living with cancer, you kind of have the physical needs, don't you? And then the emotional side of the experience as well. And I think for me, when the physical stuff is kicking in, I go back down to those real base levels, that kind of physiological stuff. You just need to be warm, you need to be comfy, you do not have too much stress, it's like that kind of real base needs come to play.
And so go ahead.
No, and I was just saying, whereas if it's a sort of an emotional struggle you're going through, maybe it's the social needs or the esteem needs that kind of come into play a bit more. So they do definitely go up and down.
Yeah, and I'd say definitely with the COVID, I mean, I'm possibly going to my 3rd year of shielding with my partner, and it's very much like there is stuff that we love to do, but when people then call and say, do you want to go out for a restaurant? It's like, no, and stop calling us to go to restaurants. We would love to. I mean, that was how, my partner's a very good cook. We loved having people around, but are you willing to lateral flow? Like, are you willing to? Because we need to know what the viral load's going to be. And then also I have to be very aware of like, how am I giving that tenderness and that checking in? And then and also I'd say, are you doing it for yourself as well? Like, that was the first thing my mom told me when I became a carer in Canada in my late teens. She said, the number one thing, it's 2 things. I remember, wash your hands regularly, do not stop, as well as know when enough's enough. And again, I'd be interested, I know some people may not be comfortable talking about this, but I would say after 16 months, I'm trying to get this accurate, after about 16 months, because again, we didn't know, and thankfully my partner hasn't had treatment, maybe happening soon, but in the first few years wasn't happening. We needed to wait 2 months to know what the issue was, the cancer. They couldn't give us any prognosis or any kind of diagnostic information really until they said, we need to look at this for the next 2 years to see the numbers, But it was about 16 months in when a friend of mine from Canada, and I very rarely go back home, she turned to me and she said, I want to ask you something. And I said, okay, sure, fine. She said, how are you? And I burst into tears, and I had not had that happen to me at all. Like, occasionally I had when people had checked in, but no one ever asked me how I was doing. And so I always have to be careful, because I'm sure many of you can check out from my personality that it's very easy for me to make things about myself. So I had to be very mindful of how I was behaving in certain interactions, because my partner needed time and space to talk about it. And so one of the things I do want to remind people of is that you will have needs, and don't be afraid to ask for that. And again, Claire, I don't know about your experience, but I was supporting Antonia in saying we actually fell out with a friend recently because I felt that they weren't actually being sensitive enough to my partner. We were having dinner, some silliness was said. My partner was very, very tired, and she kind of went for him. And I went, sorry, like, if you can't see after 2.5 plus 3 years that we were in this context, that nothing was meant or intended by, and you're still having a go, and you can't be sensitive to that, well, okay. And we haven't fallen out completely, I hope, but we haven't spoken for 10 months. And that's challenging, because to me
it's really tough. And we hear, like, when we run the group for plus ones, it's something we hear a lot of, is the isolation that comes with that, when people don't respond in the way that you'd want them to, or the way that you hope they might. It can be a really difficult thing.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, I know I know my partner's cancer, or the challenges that, but primarily him, but also I will have, is not in the forefront of everyone's mind. But when you actually go, hold on, can you just, can you just have a little bit of either understanding, or I don't even want your empathy, right? I don't want it, because you probably can't understand. Like, I don't know about anyone in this thing, but I'm sorry. Most people I know who, and I will own it and say I'm middle class, but I'm 50 now. We're no longer entitled to join the shine community, which is all good. But I'm 50, and most people, their lives are now hitting the sides. Okay, like the things that I'd expect for people to have happen in their lives, it's happening now, right? Like, what I mean by that is death of parents, or illness of family, or my own personal health. But for most people in the shine community, or generally in terms of cancer, the rare exceptions, right? Like, cancer is not common in that category of people. And the thing that I found very interesting is a lot of my friends who are fairly comfortable and have a fairly nice life, they're not necessarily wealthy, their life has not hit the sides. And so you say, oh, excuse me, I think our life is hitting the sides here. We're having a bit of trouble. They're like, huh? And I don't want to go, just you wait, because that's evil of me to go, but life is coming at you. And there is going to be some point in your life where you will have challenges. And right now, some people around you need some support. And I tell you, a lot of people, unfortunately, and I really hate this because I'm quite optimistic, I'm surprised and disappointed. So I do a lot of coaching around stress. And I will just say this, that stress occurs when our perceived abilities to cope with pressure is exceeded. Stress occurs when our perceived abilities to cope with pressure is exceeded. And the reason why I mention that to people is we hope, we use the words we should, things ought to, have to, got to be like this. Those are stress statements. As a coach, to me, I'm hearing a stress-inducing belief that could be happening. And so the reason why I mention this is, unfortunately, what is much more logical and realistic for many people, not everyone, but for many people, is there won't be the support that you expect. There will not be the support you expect. And the reason why that's a useful presupposition to use a lot of the times is then you probably won't be that disappointed. And I don't want to make people kind of go, oh, it's awful and no one's around. There is, the one thing I love about Britain is there is tons of generosity of spirit, and there's also a big sense of community. And so you will find your community, whether it's the +1 group or other people that are supporting people are out there. I am being contentious a little bit, everyone, and that's just to drive some chat or questions potentially. But I just want you to be aware that stress will occur when your perceived abilities to cope with pressure is exceeded. You probably do have more abilities than you realize. You probably have a little bit more capacity than you realize, but also don't always expect that it's going to be in the way that you want it. Like, it's there, like, I mean, and I do think people genuinely care, but they're going to be a bit clumsy with it. So if I have very strict rules as to how people have to show up for me in my life, then I will always be disappointed. I'm sure we can just talk about, make just sessions about family and friends, just generally on that through our lives, cancer aside. But I just want you to, one of the things that can help is ask for the help, but don't be prescriptive of how it's going to look, because it won't always look the way you want. And then if I turn around to someone and say, look, you didn't help me in the way that I wanted, it can then be tough to engage them a second time. The fact that they just showed up for me is half the battle. I don't know if you agree with that, Claire, or from your own experiences.
Absolutely. And it's sort of picking up on what Antonia was saying about identifying who can help in the way that you need it and when. And part of that is identifying those people. Not, like you say, kind of having sort of holding on to your expectations quite loosely, maybe.
Yeah.
So giving yourself a space to acknowledge that relationships and dynamics shift when you go through a cancer diagnosis. They always do. And it might be, I mean, I went through cancer myself, so I wasn't a +1, but my relationships with my family changed extraordinarily. And it was, I always think of it as a positive thing because we became very close. Ultimately, though, that relationship shifted, and what I lost was the relationship we had before. It was different, and it was in a bad way, but I had to give myself time to acknowledge and grieve over the fact that all my relationships had changed because of this one event. And that's a really tough thing to kind of take on board, and giving yourself a bit of space to do that in. I think it's really helped me.
Yeah, no, and Antonia mentioned, I do think there is a grieving process. There's definitely, I think we got distracted by our grieving process because we also got a puppy, and I'd lived with dogs all my life. My partner never had a dog. And so we had this double trauma. Also, it's traumatic. You know, and it is, and you know, that's quite challenging. And I'm not a counselor, so I have to be very clear about that. But you know, just to be clear that what will happen when the brain goes through a traumatic event, it will go back to the last time it went through a traumatic event. And you know, people may not have developed the skills and capacity and that is required. So that's why you'll find, you'll think all these people are old enough and been around the block enough, you think they'd be able to cope, they don't. Or, you know, again, if people hear the word cancer, that again, they may go back to a loss of a friend or a family, or have no experience of this kind of stuff. So I've just put on the slides here, if you're even paying attention to the slides, because hopefully, you know, Claire's more interesting and better to look at than me, is the thing that about the communication, I just want you to recognize, it's going to give you a little bit of input around some structural models around communication that you may or may not be familiar with. But the reason why we communicate is because we are born to do it, right? So the brain is programmed to do it. But what happens is we sometimes don't spend much time thinking about how we do it. And, you know, a lot of people will rely on certain channels to get their communication message across, such as email as a channel, face-to-face, telephone, text, and all that stuff. We all know the challenges of that as well. So, you know, the best is face-to-face, but we don't always get that opportunity. Thinking about how you communicate with others is quite important, but also why you communicate with others. And when you're asking for your needs to be met, thinking a little bit more about, are you someone that is very clear and very clear and explicit about what you ask for? Those are towards people. I come from a very towards culture, like North America's, I'm going to get this, I want to get that. Excuse me, can I get? Apparently that's rude in Britain, but hey, can I get some more? So that's a towards person. Away from people aren't people who are very clear about what they want, but they know what they need to avoid. Or they're things that they just know what they don't want. And Clay, you had something that we talked about around that helps kind of make it a bit more clear to people.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. As Paul mentioned it to me earlier, it made me think of someone called Atul Gawande, who you may or may not have heard of. He's a medic in the States, but he works a lot, or has worked in palliative care, and has written books. There's one called Being Mortal. It's very good. I recommend it. But he talks about this, and it's an interesting thing that sometimes when you're in a time of crisis, or you're feeling overwhelmed by the experience that's hit you all as a unit, it's really hard to know what you want. And that's a bit what Antonia was saying as well. It was just, it took her a long time to work out specifically what she needed. And actually saying, I need this, or can I get, as Paul was saying, is really hard in those circumstances, because you just like, I don't know, I feel awful, I don't know what I need. Sometimes it's easier to find what you don't want and what is intolerant. And Atul Gawande has this description of talking to someone who was living with an incurable diagnosis, and he said that was an easier conversation to have. He asked her, you know, what outcomes would be unacceptable to you? And that's kind of sometimes maybe an interesting thinking point for if you're trying to narrow down what it is you want. Think about what would be unacceptable, what is it that doesn't work, and it might field you to what does.
And that's really important, I think, and that's such a great point, better made than me, because I think it is really important, because you don't know where you're going. You know, you don't know in some cases, you know, what the treatment options are going to be, or what the side effects are going to be, or what it even is going to look like to you or your partner or the person that you're supporting. So yeah, I think it's useful to kind of go, I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't want. And, or even like I'll say to my partner, because sometimes we'll just talk about things that haven't happened yet, but he'll go, actually, when this happens, I just don't want that to happen, or I don't want that around me at that point. And I'm like, oh, okay, good. Like, good. Like, at least I know. There's a question I'm not gonna, that came to me privately. So it's kind of asking, like, how do you help then? I understand some people will be clumsy and not know how to. And so I think generally, if someone offers me help, I thank them and just value it, right? Because I don't want to like get rid of them. You know what I mean? It's just thinking more about recognizing that they've made the offer. I usually thank it. I neutralize it. I don't say I don't want it. I usually thank it because I don't want to get rid of the impetus that they are actually making me the offer for help. So I would just, and if you don't know straight away, I always go, and again, this comes back to thinking about what I don't want. People who have a tendency to be set goals with the away, it's called an away filter. This is some NLP talk that you're getting now, is they tend to be much more reflective. So they need time and space. So I would say go away, thank them, and say, I'm just going to go away and think about it, and then come back and ask them for what you have thought about, what you express they need. But also as well, don't forget to repeat yourself a bottom line 3 times. What is your bottom line? And sometimes you have to repeat that a minimum of 2 to 3 times. It's a negotiation technique. And it's used a lot in business training as well. I'm just mindful of the time as well. So I just want to, I'm not going to go into this just because of time, but this is what can complicate communication. So we just think briefly about what is your intention, right? Do I need to create relationships? Do I need to form those intercultural alliances? So that could even be between your family and the clinicians, as it were. Shape my own self-concept, so how I feel about myself, and then engaging with others. And this real model about communications can be quite confusing, but the main thing that we do a lot of the times is, if I encode a message, right? So I'm encoding something that I need, and I'm sending it through, it's going through all these different things, like what's happening in my social groups. Is there issues with physical and psychological context, what's happening in my brain, and then the person has to decode it. But one of the issues that comes up is really that we tend to blame the other person when they're not doing what we want. So you just have to make sure that you're exchanging formally and properly to ensure that they're maybe paraphrasing what you want, or just being a little bit more effective in your communication. Sometimes that may mean you need to do a different type of communication channel. So rather than just sending that stuff through text, you may want to give them a quick call. That can help. But also just be aware that, and I'm just showing you this because it just shows how confusing it is to sometimes effectively communicate a message. And just finally, again, I'm mindful of the time, and this is some work around interventions, and this can be quite useful and gives you some just different options. This comes from James Herons, who's from the University of Surrey, and it was built around palliative care in medical surroundings. And it was basically saying that these are just different options that we as a palliative team can use when we're facilitating discussions with patients and families and social care units, but also families can use this as well. So these are just different. The top 3 are what are called authoritative. This is when I just need to be very expressly clear about what I want. So do I need to tell someone that I need something? That's prescriptive. Informative, I'm sharing some stuff about me. So, I'd say to someone, you may want to go and look at this website so you can understand more about my specific cancer or some of the treatment options. Challenging is the most assertive. This is where we will have to confront people and go, I appreciate that you're giving me X, but I really need Y. So that's the confronting or challenging. Cathartic, it's more about understanding and sharing the emotions. So you're recognizing the emotions that the other person has. I'm going to give you some guidelines on this in a moment. Reflecting back what people are saying can be quite useful. That's catalytic, and that's really where we're going through maybe some structures or summarizing what people are saying, or getting people to summarize what I'm saying and what I need, what I'm requesting here. And then finally, we're also looking at supportive. So being much more encouraging, thanking them, valuing them. I'm just going to move across. This just gives you some more ideas around how it looks. And this is what, at times I might have to give people advice and direction about how to deal with my partner. I might ask people to seek knowledge, more information, thinking about how this may actually impact on my partner, or instructing people. And literally instructing them, right now, this is what he needs. Right now, we're not seeing people because of this. Right now, we will be seeing people, but these are the parameters. Challenging behaviors, giving direct feedback to people. When you talk to me like this, or when you come bearing, wanting to help, but you come last minute and you disrupt the dog, you disrupt our household. It is quite stressful. That's the worst thing for my partner right now. That's an example of confronting. And then you'll see the facilitative. I wouldn't worry about the stuff on the left-hand side. It's not of interest to you, really. It's just thinking more about these different styles of ways that you can have pretty challenging conversations at pretty difficult times. These kind of interventions can really help. So I'm more than happy to answer some questions around that or give further examples, but I know Claire has a few more things that she wants to say because we're moving into our last 10 minutes. So Claire, I'm just going to hand over to you briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an amazing set of things to think about in terms of reflecting on how it is you communicate and having a think about, am I doing this in an effective way? Am I doing it in a way that works for me? I'm going to move on and just give you some really practical things that you can take away. We've got a few more slides for you. Slide heavy today. But let me know, can you see that okay?
All good.
Fab. I just wanted to show you really the slides that someone called Kirsty, who was in our +1 session, came up with. And what I just wanted to explain that what she did was she created these as a kind of shorthand for talking to people. So she shared these on her social media, and she said she felt quite nervous about doing it because she was worried people might think it was sort of critical, it was a criticism of the help that people offered, but it was just her description of how things can be easier. And so we thought what we could do is we can share all these with you afterwards. I will email them out to anyone who signed up to the session, so you should get a copy of these. And you can use them in whichever way you want, whether it's just for something to read and acknowledge yourself to help you through those times. Hope you've had a chance to read through those, but you get the gist that the offer of these open offers that we were talking about puts the burden on the person to do a lot more thinking. And the last slides give some alternatives to those open offers. Offer proactive things, specific things. It says there in the bottom left, it's easier to say yes, please, to concrete things, especially day-to-day tasks. And it ends as well, if people are coping okay when you ask and they say they're fine, it doesn't mean they will be in 2 weeks' time, in 4 weeks' time. Once treatment has finished, 6 months down the line, I think that's what a lot of people find, is that the help all drops off. Like Antonia said, some people are great really imminently, and then it disappears. These are just a resource really for you to do with what you want, but we thought you might be interested to see them.
I think quickly on that point though, I think it's just so challenging after treatment. Like, you're still going through trauma. You still even may have, most of the people I deal with now, particularly Shine, still have ongoing side effects from treatment, but they may be out of treatment. But and as you say, they suddenly all head for the hills. So that's so challenging.
Absolutely. And another thing we created, actually, when we were thinking about doing this session, we put a little a shout out into the Facebook group, in the +1's Facebook group, which again is something you can join if you're interested. And I'm just realizing someone trying to join. Get them in. This is a document, we created it with the community, and it's about, sometimes how it's easier to say, we found a lot in our programs, if you've got a leaflet or a document that's been created by someone else, and you can just say, oh look, I picked this up, and it was food for thought, and it was really interesting, and it adds a third person to that conversation you're having. You don't have to be the one to say, can you do my washing for me? It says it on there for you, and it might alleviate some of that awkwardness if that's how you feel. So again, we'll send this out, and obviously feel free to do with it as you want. It's basically a list of very practical things that people in our community found really helpful through their experience. Like I say, these might not be the things that work for you, so do take it away, or make your own. Use our blurb and make your own that really work for you. And just handing those out might make that a bit easier, that conversation.
And I think, sorry, there's on that, just coming back to the question that came up earlier, is like, when someone does make the offer, I always thank people for their kindness, but I always then just kind of go, if it's not what we need, I might take it, I might not, but I would then, that's my point, to actually be quite clear about what we do need. If you wouldn't mind, there's this, and that might be more useful than that. But I appreciate the offer. It's always a useful segue. So we're just coming up to the half hour. So
absolutely. So we'll just finish off now with a final slide. I just wanted to make it really clear some of the things we've mentioned in this group, that there are other places to get support. Having that space to be able to sort of vent and talk about your experiences as a +1. We know that a lot of people are not offered the support in that way. I know I'm going about this in a slightly roundabout order, but our +1s program is available. It's available for partners of young adults with cancer, and it's a 6-week program where you get together with other +1s, And you can talk about your experiences. All these kind of conversations we've been having today come up, ways to communicate your needs, what it feels like for you going through it, because we talk a lot about how we can support someone, but actually your whole world has shifted too, and that needs to be acknowledged, and we need to give you space to talk about that. So we actually have a program coming up in January. It starts in January the 18th. The link is there. Again, like I say, I'll send these out so you've got the link, but actually, did I put that? Yes, I did. Clever. I've put it in the chat as well. So you can follow that link there, and that actually will take you straight to the page to describe that program. It's all online, so you can join from wherever you're calling in from, and it's free. So yeah, if you're interested in applying for that, do have a look at that site. Something else I wanted to flag was that we have a booklet written by +1s, for +1s. Again, you can download that, the PDF on our website, and it talks about some of these issues as well. Maggie's, I don't know if you've heard of Maggie's, but they are brilliant, brilliant places. And they unfortunately, there aren't enough of them around the country. There are plenty, but there may not be one close to you. But if there is, I would highly recommend going and finding a Maggie Centre, because they offer groups for people supporting +1s. They offer resources, they offer counselling. There's a whole load of stuff you can get there, and it's really great. And finally is just an article we thought you might be interested in reading. It was part of what triggered the Kirsty to create those slides in the first place. The real challenge of feeling like nobody really understands what you're going through is summarized brilliantly in this article. So we've just put that link there for you. I've just seen a question in the group. I will certainly make sure I send you the slides too, if you haven't signed up.
The Maggie's thing, sorry, the Maggie's thing I put in the, I'll put the link in the chat as well. I'll put the Guardian chat in there. Sorry, the Guardian link as well in the chat for everyone in a moment.
That's great. Thank you so much. And that's all we want to show. I mean, that's all. I think we've shown you a lot, hopefully, and hopefully you've got some tips and pointers. I'll stop sharing my screen in case we have any questions. I know it is, it can feel a bit intimidating asking questions in a group, but like we say, you can either do it in the chat. Do feel free to unmute if you fancy it. But what I might do is I'll finish the recording now so we can process that.